On January 29, 2025, tragedy struck the skies over Washington, D.C. An American Airlines passenger jet and a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter collided in mid-air. The collision occurred near Reagan National Airport, sending both aircraft plummeting into the icy waters of the Potomac River. Sadly, there were no survivors. The American Airlines jet, operating as Flight 5342, carried 60 passengers and 4 crew members. The Black Hawk helicopter had a crew of 3 U.S. Army personnel on board. The crash sent shockwaves through the nation's capital and beyond. Eyewitnesses described a horrifying scene as the 2 aircraft collided in the sky. The impact occurred shortly after 3 p.m. local time, just as the sun began to set. The crash site, located just off Gravelly Point, quickly became the epicenter of a massive emergency response effort. First responders, including the Coast Guard and local fire departments, rushed to the scene. They faced a challenging task as they worked tirelessly to locate survivors amidst the debris field. However, as darkness fell and the icy waters of the Potomac hampered their efforts, hope began to dwindle. By nightfall, it became tragically clear that there were no survivors. The recovery operation shifted its focus to recovering the victims and the wreckage. Divers battled frigid temperatures and poor visibility as they searched for those lost in the crash. The grim task of identifying the victims began soon after. The National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, immediately launched an investigation into the cause of the accident. Experts from the NTSB, the Federal Aviation Administration, and both Boeing and Sikorsky, the manufacturers of the aircraft involved, descended on the crash site. The investigation focused on several key areas, including air traffic control recordings, weather conditions, and the maintenance records of both aircraft. The NTSB investigators will also examine the pilot experience of both crews. The pilot of the American Airlines jet was a seasoned aviator with thousands of flight hours under his belt. The Black Hawk helicopter was piloted by an experienced Army aviator, also with a commendable flight record. Understanding the actions taken by both crews in the moments leading up to the collision is crucial to determining the cause of this tragedy. One area of particular interest for investigators is the complex airspace surrounding Reagan National Airport. Situated just across the Potomac River from the nation's capital, Reagan National has some of the most restricted airspace in the country. Pilots operating in this airspace must adhere to strict flight paths and altitude restrictions due to security concerns and noise abatement procedures. Investigators will be looking into whether these restrictions played any role in the collision. They will also examine the air traffic control procedures in place at the time of the accident. One key question is whether air traffic controllers were aware of the proximity of the 2 aircraft in the moments leading up to the crash. Another factor that investigators will consider is the weather conditions at the time of the accident. While the skies were clear, visibility was somewhat reduced due to the setting sun. Additionally, investigators will look into whether any unusual wind patterns or other meteorological factors might have contributed to the tragedy. The victims of the crash represented a cross-section of American life. Among the passengers on the American Airlines flight were families returning home from vacations, business travelers on their way to meetings, and a group of young figure skaters returning from a competition. The 3 soldiers on board the Black Hawk helicopter were all highly decorated veterans who had served their country with distinction. The nation mourned the loss of these individuals, offering condolences to the families and loved ones left behind. Flags were flown at half-staff across the country, and moments of silence were observed at sporting events and other public gatherings. President Trump addressed the nation, expressing his sorrow and pledging a full investigation into the tragedy. In the wake of the tragedy, Reagan National Airport was closed for several hours as investigators combed through the wreckage. The airport has since reopened, but the investigation continues. The NTSB will likely release a preliminary report on the crash in the coming weeks, but the full investigation is expected to take several months if not longer. In the meantime, the nation grieves for the lives lost and searches for answers in the aftermath of this devastating tragedy. If you liked the video, click the subscribe and like button.